Bienvenue. Welcome to Massey College. My name is Nathalie Desrosiers, and it's a real pleasure to have you here with us to discuss science and public policy today. I just first want to acknowledge that Massey College is built on indigenous lands, the lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. It is the treaty land of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We're very fortunate to have the Mississaugas of the Credit have an office at Massey. So we want to acknowledge the great privilege that we have to continue to do our work here. Alors, merci beaucoup d'être ici, Monsieur Quirion. Ça nous fait grand plaisir de vous avoir. Aujourd'hui, it's a special, it couldn't be more timely to discuss science and public policy. And I think we're delighted to have an audience here, both in person and online. The way in which we're going to start, I'll introduce briefly the chief scientist from the province of Québec, Dr. Rémi Quirion. And then I'll ask him a couple questions. We'll start our conversation, and then I've invited some junior fellows to join in. Let's hear the voice from the future scientist, and then open it up for questions for both the audience in person and online. If you have a question online, please enter it in the chat, and I will put it to our guest. Alors, merci beaucoup, Monsieur Quirion, Dr. Quirion, d'être ici. Just to briefly introduce Dr. Quirion, who probably needs no introduction to this audience, but I'll do just the same. Since 2011, he is the first chief scientist of the province of Québec. As such, he chairs the board of directors of the 3 fonds de recherche of the province, and he advises the Minister of Economy and Innovation on research and scientific development issues. He's also president of the International Network for Government Science Advice since September 2021. Before he was this chief scientist, he was the vice dean for science and strategic initiatives at McGill, for the Faculty of Medicine at McGill, senior university advisor on health sciences research. And he has, I've read that you're one of the most extensively cited neuroscientists in the world.
Excessively, yeah.
C'est vrai. And he has pulled a PhD in pharmacology from the University of Sherbrooke in 1980, received many honors. We're so delighted to have you here. Merci beaucoup d'être venu et de vous joindre à nous. Alors, ma première question, c'est un peu... là, ça fait près de plus de 10 ans que vous êtes le scientifique, comment on dit ça en français?
Scientifique en chef.
Scientifique en chef. Alors, des réflexions sur les changements depuis 10 ans. Est-ce que votre vision du poste a changé?
Oui, c'est une bonne question. 10 ans maintenant, avec les cheveux gris, là, je suis rendu le plus senior à travers le monde en termes de scientifique en chef, à avoir, entre guillemets, survécu 10 ans. Je pense qu'on apprend, c'est de développer un lien de confiance avec les élus, au gouvernement du Québec, les élus de tous les partis, parce que moi j'ai eu
plusieurs partis.
4 premiers ministres de 3 couleurs différentes, là, 3 partis politiques différents. Donc vraiment le lien de confiance très, très important à développer avec les élus, avec les hauts fonctionnaires, et aussi beaucoup de résilience. Parce qu'on est là, on est des aviseurs. Hein, c'est pas nous qui décident, c'est pas moi qui décide. Là, c'est vraiment les élus, le gouvernement qui décide. Donc il faut s'y faire. Puis, comme chercheur, on aime discuter, on aime dire « Ah, ils comprennent rien hein. ». Lorsqu'on est dans des postes comme le mien, on donne des avis. Par la suite, c'est le politique qui décide et on doit accepter ça. Des fois, ils suivent nos recommandations, des fois non. C'est la vie. Par contre, la pandémie a eu beaucoup de mauvais côtés, bien sûr, mais il y a eu un bon côté, au moins un bon côté. Là. Finalement, la science a été très présente. Donc, je pense que ça nous a fait connaître. Même moi, après 10 ans, dans certains ministères, on n'était pas vraiment très, très connus. Et là, les collègues dans différents ministères nous contactent. Ah, on aimerait faire des choses avec vous. Pouvez-vous nous aider sur tel aspect? Donc ça a été positif.
So we just discussed a little bit how the role has changed. The role is that you don't make the decisions, but you advise. And therefore, require some confidence, establishing a confidence for political leaders that change stripes. And and when we talk about the pandemic, I think we realize how much science has been put at the forefront. But there is a sense in which, if we read the public, they have an ambivalent relationship with this newfound role of science. Sometimes I wonder whether the rhythm of public policy and the rhythm of science is not so similar. They're very different rhythm. How do you manage this role, both in terms of advising people who are not scientists, who are politicians, but at the same time trying to keep the confidence of the public in your role?
Okay, so that's a very good question as well. I think the fact that we were very public, a bit more like elected official, like politician, high-level policymaker, when you're more visible, there's more people that like you, but there's also more people that don't really like you. And that's like even for me, I was a bit surprised. One day someone sent me photos. They had taken a photo on the street in one of the suburbs of Montreal, and I was there. I was pictured with the premier of the province, with the elder so they were the new hero of Quebec, and I was there with. But after that, of course, you receive some negative feedback because how come you said that 2 weeks ago? You were saying something else. So I think the key for us now is to talk about the scientific methods, how you build science. It's not necessarily the news of the day, the press, it's how you build science. And I think that is something that we need to work with university, with college a bit more, to explain the scientific process, to have scientists. And we start a program like that in Quebec, scientists that will go to work in government. So instead of doing a postdoc in a lab, they will go in government to learn a little bit more the reality of working in the ministry, but also for high-level policymaker to go into university to understand a bit more the reality of scientists. And of course, timelines are very, very different. Often in the job, with the pandemic even more, but the job I have is like you get a phone call from a minister or minister office and they say, what do you think about this? Well, not so sure, I don't know much about it. Can I have the answer by tomorrow morning? So that's usually like that. One of the most famous one I had over the past few years was Minister of Justice saying, what do you think about Pitbull? Not sure, what do I think about Pitbull? What should I think about Pitbull? Okay, you have the night, call me back tomorrow with some kind of suggestion. Because we had a bit of debate in Montreal about that. Some suburb you saying, yes, it's right to have this type of dog, others were saying no. So you don't know, but then you call people that you know, you call friends, and can you advise me on that? And then you give the advice. But of course, the timeline are very, very different. No time to write a PhD thesis. It's it have to be short and sweet, to the point.
So the idea is to have created this network of and mobilize their knowledge very, very quickly. So how do you do this? Like you said, I call your network, and is part of the role to create and sustain that network and expand it? And
the model that we have in Quebec is a little bit different from let's say, the model in Canada or the model in the UK. The one model we have is very close to Ireland. Okay. So at the same time, I advise the government of Quebec on various matters related to science. I also chair the 3 research funds. Each of the research funds, we have a board of 15 experts. So I have 45 kind of experts in various disciplines. So some are easier. Let's say I get a call, and a government wants an advice on dementia. That was my research field. It's a bit easier. But pitbull, for example, or flooding or whatever. But I have these experts, the network, and they know these people know others. So I think with that we can provide advice very, very quickly. And often, I was talking about confidence. Often, over the past, I would say, at least 5-6 years, it's rare that I write a written report. Often it's much more verbal advice. Like, what do you think? Then you call back, you exchange a bit, much more like that, short, sweet, to the point type of advice.
So I'm going to ask 2 questions before I move to and one is, because I invited all these young scientists, but they are, I was wondering, because is there eventually going to be a chief scientist who would come from the social science,
or is it really linked to, health sciences or physical sciences? I'm looking around Canada, the model, and it seemed to be mostly about people that come from the health sciences in general. So can you explain that to me and see whether there would be some reluctance to have a...
I don't think there will be. My hat now as head of the International Network, we are seeking social science, political scientists, expert of that type to take more leadership in terms of science advice, because my bias, and of course speak against me maybe a bit now, but how we managed the pandemic, of course we needed very, very badly healthcare expert, public health expert, all that. Where we miss a bit, I think, more on the social science type of aspect, in terms of, for example, just vaccination, all this type of thing. Same thing, the crisis we just had in Ottawa, we needed more expert on social science and humanities, and so that's something that I mentioned that today at the university, also saying these guys have to be more at the forefront. Sometimes they're a bit shy, things say, they come kind of last minute, a bit like an ethicist when you write a grant, and that it's almost there saying, I need to have an ethicist on board. It should be the other way around. In social science and humanities should be at the forefront, not waiting to get the call from the healthcare expert or the engineer. They should take leadership. They should have more leadership, in my mind.
And you don't, sometimes you don't write the advice, you don't publish the advice. And that's part, if I understand, it's part of building the lien de confiance, the confidence link, which is you say whatever you had to say and they agree, they disagree, but nobody will know. Can you imagine a model, and I think there are other models where the advice is published, which may make it more difficult for the politicians to actually agree to have advice that they disagree with, being so public. But is there a value in terms of transparency, in terms of to having a little bit more accountability around the office itself? Have you thought about it?
I think there is some advice on some subject that, of course, we understand they cannot be public. And that's okay. But most advice are not published necessarily, but if someone asks me, I'll tell, like today I was giving example, like the pit bull is one that worked. I gave one about caribou that did not work. So I think most advice, and I think transparency in terms of public trust is very important as well. So I think many politicians understand that. There is some that, of course, subject where there is secrecy and all that, probably more at the national level, at the federal level than at the province level. But I think to have some level of transparency is always good, to keep the trust of the public.
Let's hear from the junior fellows here. So I've invited three of them, Georgia Hadjis, Paul Chen, and Deborah Joseph. So Georgia is a resident junior fellow at Massey College, and she's doing her Master of Science at the Center for Multimodal Sensory Motor and Pain Research. She is determined to study the neural mechanism to understand pain. That's we've been talking about that before. So Paul Chen is a PhD student in the Department of Chemical Engineering and Applied Chemistry, and he investigates how nanocrystals grow at the atomic scale and use that insight to develop biomedical technologies. And he's also, I know that because we've had lots of time to talk about this, during the pandemic, he really studied virological factors and really was quite involved in a large team of people getting some work done to advise, to predict tools to advise us to the severity of COVID before it manifests itself. And finally, Deborah Joseph is a student in the Department of Physiology, studying the link between free fatty acids and insulin resistance. So let's start with you, Georgia. Take it from here.
Great, thank you so much, Principal de Rosier. Thank you so much for being here today. So it's very clear that science communication is key in convincing the public to really care about a pandemic and other scientific problems that we're facing. And perhaps social scientists are the key to this in trying to relay that message. Are there any other aspects you can think of that would be crucial for us to consider as future potential policymakers and scientists?
Well, that's a very, very good question, and thank you for you to be with us. I think it's very important for me and some of these guys that are in the audience here. What I'm still most proud of is the group of PhDs and postdocs that train in my team, in my lab. I would say that I learn as much from them as they learn from me, probably, and that's what still I'm most proud about today. So when I travel with government, and I said, well, tonight I will not be with you at the dinner because I will be meeting with former students in Japan, in India, whatever. So that's really key. I think the key aspect to your question is scientific literacy, and start from primary school, if not even earlier than that. So I think we have to increase scientific literacy everywhere, and to be able to fight against fake news, disinformation, all that, we have to make sure that we improve scientific literacy. So that also at the level of university, in the faculty of education, in terms of training future teacher in science, of all type of science. This is very, very critical. And we work on that a bit. It's not easy, but it's very, very important. Then at the level of researcher at university, it's not for everyone probably, but the one that will want to do it, to recognize that better. Like, for example, the Québec Research Fund, or in university, if someone does it, to recognize it better in the promotion criteria. Because often now, and it's not necessarily the dean or president or it's really often your colleague, and you're in the department of physiology, for example, and they will say, well, instead of doing that type of thing, talking to the public, you should write another paper to Nature. So often at that level, we're the worst enemy in a sense. So we need to recognize that better at your level also in terms of a student, grad student, to recognize better also in your advance that this is something that can be very helpful. And for the students that were with me, that took time to do that. It did not take them more time to do their PhD. They were as productive, if not more, because they learned something else. So and I think it's added value, but we have to recognize that much, much better. So I think of scientific literacy, your engagement into that, and having program, and we have one now, we call it engagement. So basically it's engaging the public in science. Some people call it citizen science or participatory science. Now we have a program where it's the fellow citizen that will make a proposal, for example, on pain, and then we'll match them with the researcher. It will take time, and it's not the result of the project. We give a bit of money and all that. It's not really the result. It's more, the scientific methods, so that the general public know more about the scientific method, so then they can maybe a way to fight against disinformation and fake news.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Paul?
I guess my question is on experts, how we pick expertise and how we know what's the best way moving forward. We've talked a lot about policy decisions driven by proper expertise, and ideally when the public becomes more scientifically literate, they're picking the right experts to learn from. But this is a concept, expertise, that's really been deconstructed. We've had this ongoing discussion as junior fellows in the college, and this is extended to our journalism fellows. And that many of the lessons that many of us have taken away from the pandemic have really deconstructed this idea. And expertise is a really interesting concept because as a concept, it itself is actually defined by traditionally its heuristics. So we define experts by usually, for example, how many papers they publish in a field, maybe a nice scientific post, recognitions, and so on. But there are many instances throughout the pandemic where these actually proved to be perhaps not so great measures of who the most correct experts were. I think the Great Barrington Declaration pops up in mind, maybe the aerosol and droplet debate. For example, for that latter case study, traditionally, infectious disease epidemiologists had often seen that viruses like SARS-CoV-2 were transmitted by droplets, and there's fierce recognition at the beginning of the pandemic that this is how it is, this is how it's always been, this is what's going on for SARS-CoV-2. But as the scientific discourse developed, more and more, we got more and more evidence from people who weren't traditional infectious disease epidemiologists saying that, hey, maybe it's aerosols. And as time has gone on, we've more and more recognized that. But as that discourse actually evolved, it, not always, but tended to be some of the people that we consider to be the best experts in this topic, who are the most resistant towards change, towards that new idea. And if these traditional heuristics, they held chair positions, they had many recognitions, they published many papers in this field, on this topic. If we can't rely perhaps on these heuristics anymore, I'm kind of wondering, how do you choose who the experts are and how to tangle with expertise?
For the past almost 10 years now, I'm trying to promote and facilitate the participation of scientists at the level of grad students, at the level of PIs, to be involved with the community, to the scientific discourse and all that. And I was very happy with the beginning of the pandemic. A lot of experts were there, public face of science during the pandemic. But at the same time, and that's something I mentioned in my lecture today as well, and it was on Radio-Canada over the weekend, you're an expert on one type of topic. You're not an expert on everything. And when you use your title as a Rémi Quirion, prof at McGill University, for the public, say, oh, he's a prof at the university, he must know. But yes, you're an expert maybe on that little thing, but doesn't mean you can talk about everything. And that's where we had a bit of challenge recently, because some of the experts became expert on too many things, and they were on the front page of paper almost daily, and it's harmful. So we have to find the right balance, not easy, but we have to find the right balance there, and the public probably, and government as well, need to understand, okay, this is the expertise of that person or that group. Then I need to bring on board other type of expert as the pandemic developed. And I was talking, for example, social science and humanities. At the beginning, of course, we knew nothing about that bloody virus, so we needed to understand. But as time goes by, probably we need different type of expertise. And that's sometimes hard to change. And also in paper, newspaper, social media, all that, they used to have a link with one or two type of expert, and these guys always say yes, so they will contact the same person all the time. But they should change. We need to find a way to help them, then to contact other type of expert as time goes by.
Deborah?
Yeah, thank you. My question just centers around what science is going to look like in the future and the role of scientists in that. So right now, just to lay for context, there is an evolution of like artificial intelligence and computational biology being applied to like the scientific methods of discovery. And it's also changing what healthcare is going to look like. So the practice of being a physician, how science is going to be discovered. And it's seeming more and more like the world that is working on these discoveries is becoming very different from the scientists in the lab on campus in universities. And I was wondering if Quebec is thinking of, how do we empower science students, people doing their PhDs, to really play a role in that world? Because what I fear is that eventually what would happen is that people who really have not been trained for science will then take over the scientific, discovery process. I mean, that might not happen, I don't know, but eventually we're relegating power to people from other industries as to how we think about science and how we think about our healthcare. And so I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that. I was wondering what you would advise a young scientist to do to prepare for that future.
A good question as well, and maybe the colleague could try to answer that. I see Alan here. But again, scientific literacy, starting early and making sure it's there during from primary school to university and through life. I think is very important. In terms of training, of course, if you have a PhD in biochemistry, you must know a little bit of biochemistry, I would say a lot of biochemistry. But at the same time, we should train you a bit differently. The moment I was asked by the Quebec government a couple of years ago to work on the future of university. So we work about a year on that, submit that to the Ministry of Higher Education. And now they are trying to implement some of these recommendations. And having a bit more horizontal type of opportunity of training for you. So that, yes, of course, you need to know that chemistry, but also to be exposed a bit more to, let's say, you mentioned artificial intelligence, ethics, various type of, so to a bit more horizontal. And that's still difficult because maybe I'm in the university here, so but I remember someone told me years ago, changing a university is more difficult than changing a government. And university, like McGill University, is older than Canada. So to move that boat, that university, extremely challenging because people protect their things. So to have more and more interdisciplinarity type of training program is very important, challenging for you as student, because you need to graduate in one discipline, challenging for a young PI as well. When you start as a new scientist in a department, your colleague will tell you, no, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. You need to demonstrate that you're the best on topic A, for example. So it's hard for you to start to collaborate with your colleague in other disciplines. But I think it's so rich. If we start more and more, already there is quite a bit, but we could do more. And I think at the beginning, it's, when you start to interact with people in other disciplines, and especially in other faculty, at the beginning you say, oh, they don't understand anything, they're so stupid. They don't. So it's more like, the challenge is as big as not English and French, it's English and Chinese and Mandarin. So it takes time, but then when you start to understand each other, you can solve big challenge of our society much more easily. So I think for climate change, for example, we need to have all disciplines working together, otherwise we'll never solve it, and we need to engage the public there, maybe via young students and all that are very keen on sustainable development and all that.
Thank you. There may be some questions from the audience, both in person or online. So we have a microphone there, so please stand up and go and get to the mic. If not, and I know that there's other junior fellows here that may have some good questions. If not, I'll follow up a little bit on this conversation where we talked a little bit about some of the ethical aspect of expertise. You know, you're not an expert in everything. Is there a role for the Royal Society or even for the Les Fonds de Recherche to define this ethical duty and enforce it? What would be? Can you imagine how this could take place?
Well, I think to have think tanks to discuss. Is it the Royal Society? Is it the Academy? Is it a group of experts at the university? I think things evolve with time, so we need to continue this type of discussion. To enforce it, I don't know what's the best way. It's probably at level of government also at some point that need to be done when it's a big change in culture.
So there's the other thing that I thought was, it was music to my ears to hear the more support for interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity, since that's the essence of Massey College, who was created in 1962, way ahead of its time. Nevertheless, the challenge of interdisciplinarity has always been that the very structure of universities is by faculty, the governance is by faculty, and it creates lots of difficulties in trying to undo that structure. We're doing the best we can. But some of the faculties, and you're from one of them, Faculty of Medicine, have a lot of power in the university. And where will the demand for change take place? It could come from the young people, it could come from the market, but it might need to come from the scientists themselves, who could, as they're being recruited, insist on a more horizontal team and so on.
And I think for leaders at the university as well, when I work with Alan at CIHR for the first almost 10 years of CIHR, and then went back to McGill, and the president at the time, Adam Bloom, said, well, Rémi, you cannot just go back to your lab at the Douglas Hospital. You need to work with me and be a special type of advisor in health sciences. And one of the first projects that we worked on together was health. Health, of course, you need medicine, but you need so many other different. So she said, well, of course, you will come and present to the dean of the various faculties the project that we have now, to have more kind of a interdisciplinarity type of training in medicine at McGill University. So I remember when I entered the room and they were all there and saying, yeah, it's the big faculty of medicine will try to impose something on us. But the best link that I had was the faculty of religious studies. And the guy came to see me afterwards, you have that, and maybe we could do this, we could do that. So slowly but surely to start to have more and more of these interdisciplinary type of training program in all discipline. I think engineer now, like I know more the Québec scene, but at Polytechnique Montréal, for example, a lot of it in social science and humanities, because they could produce all kinds of new tools, new gizmo. If the public or society does not want them, it's a waste. It's a waste of time. So I think more and more people realize to have these type of horizontal training program is very, very important. Challenging, but important.
That's true. So what do you see, like you've been there for 10 years, what would you want to see 10 years from now, in terms of infrastructure for science in Quebec and in Canada?
Well, I think I start first more by the science advice type of thing, so that basically it's ingrained in most, if not all department, all ministry of government, that at least they think about data, about being informed on the basis of science. Then they may choose not to follow for all kind of other reason because they are the elected official, but at least to think more about science, about scientific data when they start to develop a new law, new rule, and all this. So very, very important. In terms of infrastructure or support for science, for me, and of course, I hope my minister doesn't listen to me at the moment, because a lot of support for basic science, for fundamental, we'll talk about that. So there is, of course, the tendency, it's not only in Quebec or in Canada, it's global, in terms of having data or having result quickly, having a product, be able to commercialize. So all the very applied side, innovation side, I think basic research, fundamental research is absolutely essential. That would be the discovery of tomorrow. So for me, it's like applied research and not applied yet research. So I prefer that way over one competing against the other. But I'll see in the budget of the province on March 27 if I succeeded or not.
So that's an increased budget for research for les fonds de recherche. But you decide what goes into curiosity research or not yet applied research and applied research, or is the pressure so hard on applied research that
no, we have for us we have about 80% for the past, even before me, 20 years, about 80% of the budget. It's non-targeted, it's open, it's not me to decide, the best will win, it's peer-reviewed and all that. Then we have about 20% on what we call grand challenge of our society. In Quebec we have decided like on aging, but the average age is high. So how to successful aging, and I'm more concerned by that now than I was 10 years ago. So certainly very, very important. And then the other one, climate change, sustainable development, a big one. And with the pandemic, in a sense, what I call science and society, everything related to interaction with citizens, fake news, disinformation, there is research that needed need to do research on that front as well.
Any questions from the young panelists here or the junior fellows who are in the room? Any other questions for Wei?
Don't be shy.
No? Oh, we have a question online. Yes, Reinhard, scientists are experts. Experts are communicating their research to other experts in their field. How can we make scientists more comfortable in communicating with the public and with politicians?
Yeah, that's and Reinhard, very good question as well. So I think they need to be a bit of training on that as well. It's like some do it easily, some scientists, others do not, and it's not for everyone, and we should not force everyone to do it, because if you do it badly, it's worse than not doing it at all. But I think we need to train a bit more, and there is in Canada we have excellent people that can communicate science well, so we need to make sure that we offer that at the level of student. For young PI, I think myself, when I arrived at McGill, I was trained in communication about, I think it was like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and you did not want to go. So why do I need that? So I think that's very important, but if we have more program like engagement, like dialogue, we also have another program called Dialogue. We give a bit of money to the student to talk to their fellow citizen about what they do. So I think with that, if we build that, there will be more and more stimulation. They will be interested, more and more interested to do that if we recognize that's part of the training package.
And do you see the diversity as being a big value in ensuring that new voices and voices that may not have been heard before are heard? Anything specific that's happening on that score? And
so we work a lot. I mentioned about innovation. So the Quebec government, we are finalizing now a new strategy on research and innovation, stratégie québécoise de recherche et d'innovation. And we had kind of 2 days of discussion with minister, government official, the premier in October on that. And basically each of us, like few of us, had like 3 minutes to summarize the discussion over the past 2 days. And for me, one of the things was make sure that we do not leave anyone behind in terms of ADI, in terms of... So we have a lot of intelligent people in Quebec, in Canada. We should make sure that they have the opportunity to develop fully, independent of the field that they want to develop into. So that's something that we still have work to do, certainly in Quebec on that front, to make sure we don't leave anyone behind. And I'm afraid there with, just come back to artificial intelligence a little bit, that's certainly a challenge there. We have to make sure that the literacy there also applies, is provided to everyone. Otherwise, if 20% of our population is left behind, we'll have a big issue in a few years' time.
And we're coming to the end, so I'm just going to ask you a little bit. We know in Canada that some have not survived. Some offices of chief scientists have not survived.
Why is that? Why is that?
That's it. So, is there? So maybe the issue would be different now. Like the pandemic may have opened the eyes to the necessity of keeping these offices alive, well supported, and respected. What would be the lesson that you would say in terms of how do you evaluate yourself? How do you evaluate the value added, the value that you give to society? And is that something that you can share?
I think it's not necessarily the type of title or job that they have. Province or country could have different model of advice to government, but you need to have something. And to build that during a crisis, it does not really work. So I think what we see with the pandemic, that many countries say, now we face emergency, so we need to make sure that we'll be better prepared for the next one. So maybe it's an academy, maybe it's a Royal Society, maybe it's a chief scientist with academy. There is different model depending of the culture, depending of the way of doing things, but you need to have something, and you cannot build that during emergency. So it needs to be there. You have to be able to rely on people. I think, like in Quebec, I think one of the main reasons at the beginning for the minister who wanted to have that job for someone in his office was, it's his problem. I will call him with that question he has to answer. So you have one point of entry, a bit easier. That's a model that worked well for us, maybe not for other country or province, but I need to have something. I hope that post-pandemic will build on that to make sure that we have more built in long-term, and that we are able to network also worldwide, to exchange. And I think with the Commonwealth, more exchange, because they have that model of a chief scientist in many countries. In the Francophone world, much less. So that's why we want to create also now a French network on scientific advice, because to exchange, learn from each other, it's always very, very useful.
So you're attached to the Ministry of Economic Development.
Economy and innovation, yeah.
So economy and innovation. And other ministers may ask you for advice as well, or is like I'm sure that Le Caribou, I was Minister of Forest, so I know a lot about Caribou. I would have liked to have your advice, but what's the relationship to the
it's I think science, and basically they say science is everywhere. It just happened that with this government, science is with economy innovation. When it was Parti Québécois, I was with higher education. With Parti Libéral, I was economy, and then the second Parti Libéral, I was with education and higher education. So science moves, and sometimes it's not necessarily bad. It seems that it shows that science is horizontal as well, and should be everywhere. So and with the pandemic now, we have after the Ministry of Justice, we do a lot of thing with them, environment, mining, and mining. So almost every ministry in the government of Quebec, we have strong link with them now. So.
Merci. I think I just want to thank you. Thank you very much for coming to Toronto. You're always welcome at Massey College. I think we'd love to have you some more. Merci, and thank you to the panelists here. Thank you always to the junior fellows who participate, and thank you all, the audience, for being here. We know how difficult it is to venture out and join in live group. So we appreciate your presence. Merci beaucoup.
Merci bien. Merci bien. À la prochaine. Thank you.